is brought to you by Head Start Basketball.
Hey, Hoopheads, our friends at Dr. Dish Basketball are bringing the heat this June with $2,000 off the Dr. Dish All-Star Plus free shipping. Unlock next-level shooting analytics, unlimited access to Dr. Dish's training management system, goal-setting features, and industry-leading shipping services when you take advantage of this exclusive offer. Learn more at drdishbasketball.com and follow their incredible content at Dr. Dish B-Ball on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Mention the Hoopheads podcast and save an extra $300 on the Dr. Dish Rebel, All-Star, and CT models. Those are some great deals, Hoopheads. Get your Dr. Dish shooting machine today.
Hi, this is Corey Heights from Prep Athletics, and you're listening to the Hoopheads podcast.
Prepare like the pros with the all-new Fast Draw and Fast Scout. Fast Draw has been the #1 play diagramming software for coaches for years. You'll quickly see why Fast Model Sports has the most compelling and intuitive basketball software out there. For a limited time, Fast Model is offering Hoopheads listeners 15% off Fast Draw and Fast Scout. Just use the code HHP15 at checkout to grab your discount, and you'll be on your way to more efficient game prep and improved communication with your team. Fast Model also has new coaching content every week on its blog, plus play and drill diagrams on its Playbank. Check out the links in the show notes for more. Fast Model Sports is the best in basketball. Hello and welcome to the Hoopheads podcast. It's Mike Klinzing here without my co-host Jason Sunkel, but I am pleased to be joined for triple-double number 11. Rob Brost, head boys basketball coach at Bolingbrook High School in Bolingbrook, Illinois. Rob, welcome to number 11.
Man, I love it. Can't believe we're up to number 11, but every time I love every session, and it gets better and better as it goes. So hopefully the listeners are getting something out of it, and we can help some people out here.
It's a blast. I'm loving every one of the episodes. I always feel like we kind of dive into some specific topics that for any coach that's out there listening, hopefully you're able to pick up a nugget or two that can make your team, your program, yourself a better coach kind of through our conversation. So we're going to start, Rob, with a development in the state of Illinois that is slowly but surely making its way across the country. Who knows when we're going to get all 50 states participating, but the shot clock is coming to Illinois. Tell me about your excitement level for that.
Yes, I mean, I've been a long time proponent of the shot clock. And, we've done a lot of work here in Illinois to get this thing going. And several coaches did a lot of work to get this thing rolling. And so, obviously we're thrilled that it's coming. And we're thrilled that we could even start to use it this year. If it's in agreement with both the coaches, we can start using it immediately if it's installed and both the head coaches agree to use it. So I'm really encouraged by it. I think it's great for the game. I think it's great for our kids. I think it's great for our state. And, obviously, we would have loved to have it sooner, but we'll take it. I see a bunch of stuff that Wisconsin today or yesterday voted down the shot clock. So I just don't understand it at all. I mean, we have a play clock for water polo here in Illinois, and we can find somebody to run the play clock for water polo. So I think we can find somebody to run the shot clock for boys and girls basketball. So I'm just really happy that it's coming, and I'm happy that it's here, and I'm happy that we can start using it really effective immediately if we want to. And some tournaments were using it last year and some shootouts that got special permission from the IHSA, but now it's kind of across the board. And so just thrilled that it's here, and it just adds so much. I don't know if strategy is the right word, but philosophically it adds to the decision making of both players and coaches. So I think it's great for our game here in the state of Illinois. That's for sure.
How do you see it impacting your team the game that you play? Because anybody who's listened to you or seen you talk knows that you like your teams to play fast. So when I think about the impact on your team, I think of it not so much from an offensive standpoint where you're like, man, we're going to have to really speed it up and make sure we're getting a shot off in 35 seconds. I see it more being an impact of the other way where teams might try to slow you guys down and work the ball and manage possessions. That's where I see the impact just based on what I know about your program. So I'm just curious, how do you see it? Where do you lie on this?
It's going to be interesting because I think in a lot of ways it gives other teams that don't play like we play a little bit of advantage, because now, and I don't want to give the keys to being my team, but I'm about to do it. If you can get all five back and get in a zone and just clog up the lane and protect the lane and make us chuck a shot, sometimes we're going to have to chuck a shot. And that's going to be the methodology, I think, of beating us. And I think in a lot of ways, that's going to help some teams strategy-wise against us. Now, obviously, it'll help us because teams won't be able to hold the ball like they've done in the past. And so offensively for us, I don't know if it's going to change a lot of what we do, but we're going to have to get into actions or get into what we do quicker in the half court, although it's not really that isn't really an issue for us. But what I'm saying is if teams get all five back, say, and are waiting for us, we're not going to be able to be as patient as we've been in the past. And it sounds weird because I don't think we really ever hold the ball for 35 seconds, but just the psychology of it plays a role into kids and how they play, just like where the 3-point line plays a role. And if you took the 3-point line out, guys would probably shoot from a lot closer in, right? So, it's going to be, I think, a really good change for us. And just strategically, you can defend without fouling, and you can defend without fouling really up until the last minute or 2 minutes, unless you're really down. And so I think it's just a huge advantage, and it helps teams that play against our style, because once we get up and we start to spread you out, you would have to come and guard us. Now you don't really have to come and guard us. We have to attack you. And so, there's going to be some advantages that teams are going to have style of play wise against us, even though they want to play slower, because, you saw even in the state title game, not this past season, but the season prior, Moline got up, I think it was 6 or 8, and they just spread the floor out for the rest of the game. And you couldn't do anything with them because they had a Big Ten point guard and then a Big Ten big, and they would just spread it out and he would break them down, and then they would throw it to their big and he would lay it up. And so, those things are going to be changed. Now you're going to have to actually play basketball. And nothing against Moline or anybody that did that. That's exactly what they should have done because they won the state title. So, it's just going to add more basketball into the equation. And I think wherever you can add more basketball, that's a good thing for our kids because it helps them with decision making and all the things that makes basketball what it is, and makes it better. And so, I'm just thrilled that it's here, and I'm thrilled that it's coming.
Going back to the point that you made about the presence of the shot clock having an impact on players and the way that they play and sort of the way that they approach it. What's always interesting to me when you think about the different levels of basketball and the 24-second shot clock, let's say in the NBA, and obviously we're talking about the best players in the world, but those guys inbound the ball with 1.6 seconds, and you pretty much know that they're going to get a good shot because of how well they execute and how skilled they are, and they know how to handle the clock under pressure. College, okay, you're at about 4 or 5 seconds if you're at a high level. Those players can manage that. And then you think about a high school end of the half or end of a game situation, and it gets down to about 10 seconds and the whole crowd is panicking and the players are going nuts, and all of a sudden they're firing up a shot with 7 seconds to go. And it just creates this frenzy because that clock is ticking down. So as a coach, how do you anticipate, I'm assuming in practice, you're going to put the clock on, because now it's going to happen not just 4 times a game at the end of a quarter. Now you're looking at that happening over and over and over and again in a game. So how do you think about preparing your team for the end of shot clock type of actions, which obviously, you're going to try to play fast, but
this is going to sound funny, but I think it's going to, for us, it's going to take more preparation on the defensive end, how we are going to handle it, than on the offensive end. And I know that sounds crazy, and I'm an offense guy. And, some of my colleagues are like, you never even work on defense, which is fine. I get all that. But I think it's going to be more of an adjustment not an adjustment, but there's just going to be more teaching, like, things like you say now, like don't bail them out with a foul. That's going to become even more true with the shot clock. And so, you don't want to foul in the last 5 seconds of the shot clock. Little things like that, that become big things when you get to the sectional final or the super sectional or the region final, whatever the case may be, or the conference title game or whatever it is. When you're playing someone that's about at the same level as you are, those things all matter. And like what you said, we always talk about we want more possessions than the other team. So we want the last possession of the first quarter. We want the last possession of the half. We want the last possession of the third quarter. And, if it's a tight game, we want the last possession of the game. And so, we want at least 3 more possessions than the other team. And that's big for us to have the last quarter, all of that stuff. But that might not be even possible now with the shot clock. And so, every possession I think is amplified, if that makes sense, even though you're going to get more of them. And so it's really a double-edged sword, so to speak, as far as how you're teaching it, right? So we play ultra fast anyways, but, we can't forget about what got us there. So obviously we're going to do the same thing we do on offense as we've always done, except for if it happens to get down to 10 for whatever reason, and it will, then what are we going to do then? And so now you have an end of quarter situation happening probably 2 or 3 times a quarter, where it's that situation. So those things are going to need to be practiced, but at the same time, the randomness of those needs to be practiced. But, I'm going to get into some randomness things with topic number 2. And we want our kids to be able to play random basketball, because that's what basketball is. And you've heard me say this a ton of times. Like, if I play you 10 times, 10 different things are going to happen when we play the 10 times. And so the randomness of basketball comes up, and your team has to be ready for those things and the randomness of it. You cannot, I know coaches try to, but you cannot possibly prepare for every single situation that happens in the game. That's why some of your practice has to be random, and how you develop your practices need to be random, which again, we're going to get more into. I'm going to touch on that in our second topic, but back to the shot clock. I think, as long as you're practicing with it and, doing what you're supposed to with it, that I don't know if it's going to be as much of a factor for us on offense as it is on defense, if that makes sense.
No, it does. I think when you start looking at it, there's lots of impacts that may not be initially apparent when you first look at, okay, how does this impact what I'm doing in all aspects of the game? And certainly I think you bring up a great point about end of quarter situations where in the past, if you wanted to make sure you had that last possession and you get the ball back with X number of seconds, provided that you don't turn the ball over, you can control that. Now, if you get the ball back with 50 seconds left, now you have a decision to make, right? Which
are you going 2 for 1? Yes.
Right. And a lot of times you see the horrible 2 for 1 where, hey man, we're just chucking up a shot that has it's like a 5% expected value shot but hey, we got a 2 for 1. And so there's managing that. And again, obviously you're talking about high school players where
Yes.
even in the NBA, guys make,
Yes.
I would say, tremendously poor decisions sometimes on what on what a 2-for-1 looks like. So with a high school kid, that's clearly something that you're going to have to practice, talk about, discuss, watch film on, help them to understand exactly what that looks like. And so there's a lot of, as you said right off the top, there's a lot of impacts and ways that it affects the game that I think it may not even be readily apparent, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no question. No question. Because, before, I'll just give an example. Like if you were down with 40 seconds to go, when do you start fouling? You kind of go for a steal until about the 20-second mark, and then you start fouling. Well, if there's 40 seconds now, do you just play it out and then hope that you get a stop rather than try to give them free points that you don't need to? Or do you, if a certain guy has the ball, you foul him like you kind of did in the past with 40 seconds to go, and then with other guys, we're not going to foul and let the time just tick. So there's so much more nuance to the shot clock that I think even coaches sometimes don't realize are going to happen. And, I just spent the last 5 or 6 days out in Colorado Springs helping select the U17 national team. And, they were playing all FIBA rules. So it's 24-second shot clock. If you get an offensive rebound, it's 14. So you really need to get into your stuff, and you really need to understand the pace of play and all of those things. So it just adds a whole nother dynamic to the game.
Yeah, that end of game stuff is super interesting to me in terms of taking out the intentional foul out of the game, or at least making you consider whether or not to do it. In Ohio this past season, we did away with the 1-and-1. So everything was five fouls per quarter. And I don't know about you, Rob, but I still can't watch. Like I watched games this year and I'm like, wait, the dude's going to the bat. He's going to the line for 2. I'm like, where's the 1-and-1? Where's the pressure?
I almost like it better if everything's a 1-and-1.
Yeah, I agree.
There's like on a shooting foul, I get it, and you missed it, you get 2. But everything after 5 should be a 1-and-1 up to 20. Like, who cares? Make the kid step up there and make a free throw, because that's what it is. And so, I'd almost like the opposite to have happened rather than the 2 shots. But anyways, they don't really consult me, and I give my opinion all the time, and nobody really cares. Although the shot clock thing, I got several texts from people once it passed, like, thanks for all your help with that. But, there was other coaches that did a lot more work than I did here in the state of Illinois. So I'm just glad that it's here. But it's going to bring a lot of nuance, not only for the coaches and the players, but for the crowd to be educated and the parents to be educated what some of the strategies are, right?
Absolutely.
And so, that's going to take some time as well. So at any rate, I'm just excited that it's here, bottom line.
I like the idea that you can come back. It makes coming back more realistic, and it makes it so that basketball is still being played in order for that comeback to take place. Now, look, you can still foul if you want to, if that's the route that you choose to go. So it gives you multiple ways to be able to get back into a game. That's what I didn't like about the Ohio rule of going to 2-shot fouls. I thought it made it much more difficult for a team that was down to come back. It pretty much negates the strategy of fouling, because even your worst foul shooters are going to probably go up there and make 50%. Right. When there's a lot less pressure.
It's guaranteed points. When you got 2 shots, it's guaranteed points. But 1-on-1,
correct.
And it puts a little heat on that shooter as well. And like I said, just 2 minutes earlier, I wish it was the exact opposite. Everything after 5 was a 1-on-1, and that's it. Obviously, if you get fouled on a shooting foul, then you would get 2. But it's interesting. I don't think they're going to change the rule because of this podcast.
Probably not. It's sad to me. There's going to be a whole generation of kids that I'm going to say, hey, that's a 1-on-1, and they're going to be like, what? What are you talking about?
Exactly
I don't even know what that is. So that makes me a little sad. But anyway. All right, coaches, listen up. It's time to kick this season up a notch and give your team the competitive edge they deserve with Game Changer. Game Changer is the ultimate tool for coaches, with features designed to help take your team to the next level. It's time to take this season to new heights. Download Game Changer for free on iOS or Android to start getting valuable stats and video your team can build on. Get the ultimate coaches tool today by downloading Game Changer. Game Changer. Stream, score, connect. Learn more at gc.com/hoopheads. That's gc.com/hoopheads. All right, Rob, topic number 2, we kind of hinted at it, and in a way it dovetails nicely with topic number 1 about just teaching your team and learning how to handle different situations in regard to the shot clock. But just the question is, how do you, within your practices, how do you build in time for special situations? And by special situations, I mean out of bounds plays. I mean hot strategy in the last 2 minutes. Do you put time on a clock and have the two teams go at each other and kind of talk about decision making? Just how do you incorporate those special situations? Because as you mentioned, if you just line up and practice your same out of bounds play 15 times in a row, it's not really realistic to how that's going to occur in a game. So just give me an idea of how you, as you said, insert that randomness into your special situations in practice.
I think the special situations have to be random, right? Within practice. And so, for example, we'll be doing it. And now this is assuming we already have the sideline out of bounds or the inbounds under in, so that people know what it is. Our players know it and they know what's happening. And so, like in between our 11-man fast break drill, as soon as we get done with that, I might say 2 minutes on the clock, sideline out of bounds, red team up 5 or down 5 or down 1, whatever it is. And then we just do it from there. And so the kids don't know that it's coming, is what I'm saying. And so, I'll just say, okay, this is what we have now. Certain team is red, certain team is white. There's 2 minutes on the clock. You're down 3. You have the ball. Everything's a 2-shot foul. Let's go. And then we'll play it out, and then we'll talk it out. And so the kids, meaning the players, can call a timeout themselves and they can meet, but the coaches are not involved at that point. They can't even make a suggestion. They're just officiating or whatever they're doing. So my job is to observe that. And then once that 2-minute segment is over, then we talk about some of the decisions that were made, right? And so, if it's a super egregious thing with a minute 15 and there's still a minute 15, I might say, hey, fellas, what are you doing? You might want to rethink this a second. Just take a timeout and rethink what you're doing right here. So I like the randomness about it, and I like that the coaches are not involved. And so that way they're making decisions, meaning the players. And I'll tell them how many timeouts they have, and they kind of, I don't want to say get used to, but they know what these things are when we do them. It's just the randomness of them and whatever the situation is, right? And so, it might be out of bounds under with 4 seconds left. Let's play. We're down 1. And then we play it out, and then we get a drink right after that, right?
Right.
And so, we'll just do those kind of starting after the first week of practice. I would say we would insert 2 or 3 of those types of things right into practice, and it'll just be listed as situation 1. And then I'll just give a narrative of whatever the situation is. I'll have a list of the 2 teams, and then we play. Like I said, the players can call timeout if they want, and usually each team has 1. And then the coaches are not involved. And then we'll do other ones where I'll give both teams an assistant coach is their head coach, and they can do whatever they want. If they want to meet with them, they can meet, or we're out of timeouts. Or, like I'll give one team a timeout, the other team's out of timeout. So it's completely random with the situation and when we're doing it and all of those things. So that's how we kind of practice those situations, if you will. But, I can't tell you how many timeouts I've gone into, and I'll say, hey, this is really similar to what we did 2 weeks ago. Remember that? Where we had the thing? And it's not the exact same thing, but it's darn close. And I said, remember that decision we made with 1 minute to go where we, ran such and such and we were up one and we took a three instead of hunting the paint and getting fouled. Remember that when we did that in practice? This is where we are again right now. And so just the familiarity of a situation similar and where we've been through it before. And obviously they're never going to be exactly the same, like ever. And so, but I can tell you, I remember timeouts from this past season where I go in there and say, hey, remember this from practice, or even remember this from 2 games ago when we were in a similar position and we fouled a shooter and we were down 2, and then, just stuff like that. So, my practices have changed. When I first started, I wanted clean practices where everything was perfect and nobody made any mistakes. And now I want almost the exact opposite. I want a lot of, not mistakes necessarily, but a lot of randomness, a lot of reactions to what situations we put them in. And they have to make decisions based on what's happening around them, just like a game. And so we want the randomness to be really a huge part of the practice, if that makes sense.
No, it does. Do you see, in the course of doing that, do you see your team leaders emerge through those situations where players have to get together and all of a sudden you're like, man, I hear this guy's voice more than anyone else's? Is that something that you look for, that you then kind of develop those guys as vocal leaders? And obviously there's all different types of leadership, but I would just imagine in those situations that you're seeing the guys who are, okay, this guy's on this team. I can already predict before we start this that when they get together and talk, that this guy is going to be the driving voice behind what's going on.
Yes. I think it's a lot of it is that what you just said, but even more of it is staying calm and being able to make decisions despite the adversity that's happening to you. For example, I'll say, one of the situations is, hey, there's 2 minutes to go, you're down 9 and the other team has the ball. Well, immediately before we've ever practiced this, we'll get 3 or 4 guys like, dude, we got no shot. We're down 9. What are we supposed to do? And then we just play it out. And then I'll say something like, if we're playing Homewood Flossmoor, who's one of our rivals, and we were down 9, would everybody be freaking out and saying we have no chance to win? Is that what you would do then? No. You would figure out or try to figure out the best mode of winning the game. And so that's what you should start to do here. So I think it creates less panic when you get into those situations. And I'll give you a perfect example. Last year in our second game, we were ranked in the top 5 or so, and we were down, I think, 19-9 at the end of the first quarter. And, everybody was calm. Nobody was yelling. Nobody was like, God, I can't believe we're down 10 to these guys. We just went about our business. We ended up winning by 15. And so because of the randomness of the situations that we put them in practice, and because we emphasize figuring things out in those types of situations, I think we're more equipped to react better, if that makes sense. Certainly the leadership has a lot to do with it from the players, but ultimately the calmness and, the reaction of, in particular, the head coach, but all the coaches, when you get into those situations, to just, understand we got this. We just need to do better. We need to do this better and this better. And, every timeout is 1 or 2 things and that's it. And just keep going. We'll just keep going and play. And so the randomness helps with all of that when you get into games where crazy stuff happens, right? Like a kid hits 4 3-pointers in a row and they're on a 12-0 run, whoa. But it works the other way too, because we go on a lot of runs ourselves. And so, last year I remember saying several times, remember the last time we went on a 15-2 run, then they made 3 threes in a row because we kind of relaxed and we, hesitated and we thought kind of we had the game in hand. Remember that? That's why they're calling a timeout. So let's not allow that to happen this time. And so, I think, like I've talked about several times, I do a lot of stuff by feel and just by how I feel the game is going. And I make, my decisions based off of feel. And so I want our kids to be able to have the freedom to do the same thing, right? And they can't do that if everything is so rigid that they can't make any decisions. And it's never an if that situation, or if they do that, we do this. It's never as simple as that. And so we give our kids a lot of decision-making ability, but at the same time, we're the coaches for a reason, right? So we're going to make suggestions and, say, hey, what are you seeing out there? What do we need to do better? Those types of things. So I think just the randomness of all of that and the situational things that you need to put in, if you can just put them in little by little, like we don't have a 10-minute segment every practice where we do a situation and then we do 3 different situations. We don't do it like that. We put it in a random thing, like after we get done with our fast break drill, then I'll just throw in a situation. Then we'll be working on whatever defensive positioning or whatever it is. Then right after that, I'll put in another one. And so, we start doing that in week 1, at the end of week 1, once we've had time to put in, our inbounds unders, our sidelines, and those types of things. And then that's when we start doing the situational stuff. And so it's completely random. The guys don't know really when it's coming. And even our assistants, like when I'll hand them the practice plan, are like, well, what is this one? Well, this is the one we're doing today. And so, but then my assistants will try to jump on it, like the next one, like, coach, maybe we should do this situation or maybe we should do that. And that's really helpful for me too, because I'm not the smartest guy, that you do a podcast with. So, I need all the help I can get to put our guys in situations that A, they're going to be in, and then B, at least be comfortable, whatever those situations are.
You mentioned about timeouts, and I think it's a good point. I just want to hit on it here just briefly, because I think it kind of fits into this special situation idea. You talked about having 1 or 2 key points in a timeout. And I know that I, as a coach, am not very good at that. Like I'm the 17 things that I just noticed that I want to share with somebody. And so tell me about how, when you call a timeout or the other team calls a timeout, what's the process that you go through in your mind? I know a lot of what you talk about is, hey, I just coach by feel and kind of figure that out. But as you call a timeout or your opponent calls a timeout, how do you think about, okay, what are the most important things that my team needs in this moment? Do you have a specific way that you think about it, or just how do you go about designing a timeout?
Well, usually I'll meet with my assistants for 10 to 15 seconds just quickly before I go in there. And depending on what they say, my job is to sift all of that. And there's usually a lot of things that are being thrown at me at that point. And I'll have an idea of what I want to say anyways, just by going off the feel. But I try to keep it to 1 or 2 key things. And then first mention something that we're doing well. Then mention the 1 or 2 key things that we need to do better. And then the third thing is just a reminder about, something else. Like a lot of times it's a reminder to give reminders, right? Like we tell our guys, give reminders before they're necessary because they're no good after they're necessary. Just keep doing that. And so let's stay together. Things, certain things I'll just say when I first get in there, like, hey, really important that we stay together right now. Let's lock in. This is what we need to do. This thing, second thing, let's give lots of reminders and let's keep burying these guys or whatever the situation is. And then that's basically it. Now, obviously we'll draw something up, but if we need to, but another thing I've been doing a lot of, and I did a lot of it last year, is I'll let my assistants go in to the timeout sometimes, and they can run the timeout. And so, that does several things, in my opinion. It, A, tells the assistant coach that I trust him and that I trust what they're going to say in there. And then B, it gives our players a more comfort level with those assistants, and it gives them, I don't ever want it to be perceived like what I say goes and what everybody else says we don't ever do. And so, a lot of times I have to overrule some of their suggestions, and I know that can get irritating as an assistant coach sometimes. So one of the ways I combat that piece of it is, we'll meet, and then, one of my assistants' name is Brandon, and he'll say, Coach, what about this on offense? And I'll say, okay, good. Here, you go tell him. And then I'll hand him the board. And then he goes in, and I don't even, I'll go get a drink of water or whatever. Or I'll say, you tell him that, but also remind them of this. And then he'll say, okay. And then, another one of my coach's name is Paul. He's in charge of the defense. He'll say, Coach, well, we need to do a better job of blitzing the ball screens or whatever it is that we're working on. I'll say, you go in and tell them, but also tell them this. And then that's it. And so, I think the timeouts have to be focused, but very brief and only one or two key items. And that's it. And so I can't tell you how many times I go in timeouts and I'll literally just say, hey, we got to stay together. Somebody needs to make a play. That's what needs to happen here. I don't even know what that play is, but you're going to have to make a play. And then that's it. That's literally the whole thing. And my manager's handed me a board and I don't even use it. And so I'm really probably I've gone too far on the other side where I don't try to predict everything that's going to happen and micromanage the game really at all anymore. And so I don't know if that's a strength or a weakness, but I'm just a lot more comfortable because I have really good assistants. That's the first piece of it. And then B, I want everybody to feel involved and not that it's my show, that it's our thing. And so I try to give them as much autonomy as I can and let them, do the timeouts and take the timeouts if need be. Now, obviously, there's certain times where I just take it and go with it, right? And that's off of feel as well. And so people say all the time, well, you just do that because you're good, or you only do that when you're up 20. No, I'll do it. I did it in the sectional final last year several times. And so, I just think it helps everybody, including the kids mostly, because if it didn't help them, then why would I do it? And that's ultimately who we want to help become better players, right? And better people is them. And so obviously it helps with my assistants. And it really helps that I have assistants that have been head coaches before. And it really helps that our assistants are totally bought into what we're doing. All of that helps. I get that. And so I know some head coaches, you don't have I don't know if trust is the right word, but maybe they're not ready to handle timeouts, or maybe they're not prepared enough to handle timeouts. So I'm not saying that's for everybody. That's just where we're at as a program at this particular point.
Yeah, I think to kind of wrap up this topic, I always go back to a thread that has run through many of our conversations, which is that you have often said that as you've matured as a coach and as you had more experience, that you've delegated more and more and theoretically are doing, at least from the outside, somebody who's looking at it who doesn't necessarily understand that you're actually doing less, that somebody who's observing a practice or a game would say, man, Coach Brost from 15 years ago compared to Coach Brost today, he looks like he's not doing, hardly anything. And I always go back to the point that you made that you felt like your program really took off when you were able to believe enough in the people around you to delegate some of those tasks. And then that freed you up to, again, use some of your skills and talents to kind of see all that high level stuff and to be able to impact and help your coaches grow and help your players. And so I think that's been a theme that's run through a lot of our conversations, Rob.
There's no doubt. And, I say this at a ton of the clinics that I speak at. My job is not to coach all the players. My job is to make sure all the players get coached, right? And so, and that goes from all the way from our varsity kids all the way down to the freshmen, right? And so it's more of a CEO approach, I guess you would say. But I try to be, and I've used this analogy maybe a couple times here, but like our program is like a big ship, right? There's a ton of stuff going on and we're going down, and I'm just the little rudder in the back. But if the little rudder in the back gets out of whack, that thing is going into the iceberg, right? And we're just going to go down if that rudder is not pointing in the right direction and then making sure that everything is happening the way that it should be. And so that's what I am. I'm the little rudder on the back that prevents the thing from going ashore But at the same time, we can go pretty straight and we can go for a long time if, I'm overseeing everything that needs to be done. And then if I can handle things in the right way and, create relationships, the whole thing. So now this is getting philosophical and not really how we handle situations on sideline, inbounds and stuff. But everything kind of goes back to that anyways.
Your first impression is everything when applying for a new coaching job. A professional coaching portfolio is the tool that highlights your coaching achievements and philosophies, and most of all, helps separate you and your abilities from the other applicants. The Coaching Portfolio Guide is an instructional membership-based website that helps you develop a personalized portfolio. Each section of the Portfolio Guide provides detailed instructions on how to organize your portfolio in a professional manner. The guide also provides sample documents for each section of your portfolio that you can copy, modify, and add to your personal portfolio. As a Hoopheads Pod listener, you can get your Coaching Portfolio Guide for just $25. Visit coachingportfolioguide.com/hoopheads to learn more. Topic number 3. When you are developing and thinking about working with your players from a player development, skill development standpoint, are you dividing them up by positions? I think about teams that I've played on, that I've coached on, where you'd go, I remember as a high school player, our coaches would always go, all right, big, little. And one group the bigs would go down to one end and work on some stuff. And then the guards would go down at the other end. And that was what it was called, was big, little. And at the same time, I've been on teams and coached on teams where you're doing player development work, and every player, regardless of whether you're the 6'6" post player or you're the 5'8" point guard, everybody's working on the same thing. So maybe you got everybody working on footwork in the post, or maybe you got everybody working on ball screens. So the guys are handling the ball. So how do you think about just developing players overall in terms of, are you looking specifically at positions? Is it a mismatch of sometimes we put everybody together, sometimes we break it down individually? How do you think about that?
I think it's a balance, right? Because certain players have certain strengths, right? And your job as a coach is to pull out the strengths of a player. And so it's kind of like parenting. You got to find the correct balance of that. And so my direct answer to that is, it just depends on the players that you have on your team, right? And whatever skill set they currently are at. That's why it's important for you to know everybody as an individual and all of those things. And so certainly when I meet with a player at the end of the season, like, what should I work on? What should my workouts look like? Well, the skills that you need to develop are what you need to work on, but how does that fit into our team, right? And what do we already have? And so all of that kind of rules the development piece, right? So I can't say next year our development piece is going to look a little different than what it looks like this year, if that makes sense. Because I'll give you an example. JT is going to be a senior. He's a returning All-State player for us. He's about 6'7". He came here with a 5-man skill set. Last year I said, by the end of next year, I want you to have a 4-man skill set. And by the end of your senior year, I want you to have a 3-man skill set, right? And so, his development helps him, but it also helps the team, right? The more versatile he is. And so individually, wrapping them up. And if he's doing a workout with my son, for example, who's a pure point guard, who's just a point guard, and he won't be anything else because of his size and his stature and all of that stuff and what he's good at, it's a little combination of things. So certainly we'll work on shooting the three. We'll work on some ball handling and doing all that stuff, because the big, as you put it, needs to work on that too. But, we'll put them in pick and roll situations, all of those things. So I think it's just a balance of where you think your team is at and how you play as a philosophy and what skill sets you want your players to develop. And so, we like to have the lane open. We like to attack the paint and put pressure on the rim. So we don't have a pure post-up guy right now in our program. Now, don't get me wrong, JT can post up, and sometimes we do that, and he works on that, obviously. And Jaden and some other guys that we have that are bigs that we can take advantage of that. But from a philosophy standpoint, we like to keep the lane open and, drive and kick and, playoff advantage, all of those things right now. So I think it's a balance of all of that, if that makes sense. So we don't just lump them all together and make them all do the same thing. We don't do that. But a lot of what we ask our players to do is similar, because we need them all to be able to face the basket and at least be a threat, especially off the dribble. And so, the development piece is a tricky one, because not only are they hearing from me, but they're hearing from their trainer, their parents, their uncle, everybody, social media, all of that stuff. So I've kind of not worried about that as much as I used to, because as long as they're in the gym and they're working, I think that's where the main thing lies, because they're developing good habits then, right? And so I know there's probably somebody listening at home like, well, what if they're not working on the right stuff? Then it doesn't matter what the habits are. I get that, but I can only control so much of what they're working on, and I'll give them suggestions, and we'll make up workouts that they can do on their own and all of those things. But once they get in with their trainer or whoever, they're going to work on whatever they want to work on anyway. So that's kind of a roundabout answer to your original question. But I think that's kind of how we do it.
I like the idea of expanding the player's skill set, right? So you have to have an understanding of, okay, where is this guy now? Like, he can do this particular thing well, or he fits in what we do. He fits into this slot in our offense. But the more versatile we can make that player, the better off they're going to be, because now they can slide across positions. And especially if they can guard multiple positions. I mean, a lot of times we discount defensive development when we think player development. I don't know about you, but the first thing that comes into my mind always is offense. And player development and getting better. We sometimes forget in the player development world that defense is 50% of the game. And so what's interesting is, hearing you talk about your players, and obviously hearing you talk about Trey and just how you kind of have helped him to develop. And one of the things that I did with my son this summer is we're trying to find guys. And for people out there, I think most people know, but my son's 6'6", and he's a post. He's going to go play Division III, and he primarily plays inside. So he'll screen and roll to the basket, and he can make a 12 to 15 footer fairly consistently, and that kind of thing. But at the college level, that's going to sort of pigeonhole him to some degree in terms of offensively what he can and can't do. So one of the things we've talked about is exactly what you just described: is how can we take what you do well, continue to make sure that that's a strength, but can we expand what you can do so you can now step out on the floor and face up and put the ball on the floor and get to the rim? Or, now can you knock down a college three if you're being left open? Because again, guys are sagging in or helping or whatever the case may be. And so what we started to do, we found a kid who he's actually in our league, who's all-league point guard, who was, as a sophomore, he's probably going to end up being, I would think, a Division I college point guard. And so my son just started working out with him and, playing one-on-one. So here's a kid who, again, doesn't play the same position. They're not necessarily working from the same base of a skill set, but yet from my son's perspective, he's going to have a little 6'1" guy down around his waist, digging at the ball as he's trying to put it on the floor and do things. And then conversely, here's a 6'1" point guard who has a 6'6" kid who moves well, who now you're coming off a screen and maybe there is a switch. And so you got to used to be able to shoot over a guy has length. And so there's just a lot of benefit for those two kids, even though you might from the outside say, hey, those two guys don't really fit together in terms of two guys who should be going against each other. But yet I think it's almost a perfect match, because again, they provide challenges to one another in unconventional ways that helps them both to expand what they're doing. So it's really an interesting, I think, player development. Sometimes we get caught up in, you've got to be doing this for your position.
Yes.
And look, again, you got to double down on your strengths, and you clearly want to make those. But if you're looking at, well, how do I get better? What can you add to your game to be able to just make you a little bit more versatile, harder to guard? And then
Yep.
conversely, how can you make sure that you can guard multiple positions? The more positions, as you well know, the more positions you can guard, man, the easier it is for you to find playing time, especially in the way the game is played today with as much switching as is done at every single level of the game.
There's no doubt about it. And 7 or 8 years ago, I got to spend some time with Kevin Eastman, who was assistant in the NBA for a long time. And he kind of put it like this to me. He said, every kid is capable of a certain level, but he or she is only doing a certain amount. And so that's called a capability gap. And your job as a coach is to close that up with the help of the player as much as possible. Now, not too many guys are going to, close it up all the way, and very few do. But your job as a coach is to help the player close that capability gap. And he put it that way to me, and it has made sense to me in so many different situations, not only with basketball, but what we do from a leadership standpoint and how we develop leaders and what people are capable of and what they're actually doing. And so that capability gap that Kevin Eastman, talked about with me, it had to be 7 or 8 years ago when I was able to spend some time with him. And that has stuck with me, all the way through here, is closing that capability gap, not only for players, but also for myself. Like, I am capable of this, but I'm only doing this much. So my job is to close that up and close that gap up as much as possible. So I think that all plays into that individual, training and development.
It absolutely does. And I think you're bringing it to the coaching side of it, that, look, I think that there is, when I consider myself as a coach, when I consider myself just as a human being, that capability gap is something that, if you have a passion for whatever it is you do, whether you're a player and you want to close it or whether you're a coach, I think it becomes, again, one of those pursuits that is just something that it's a passion, right? So you love the idea of being able to close that. Like, I think about you as a coach, like the number of things that you're doing to like this conversation with me, not that it's every single time that, man, I'm just bestowing a bunch of wisdom to you, but hopefully by having the conversation,
no question,
you and I, like I feel like, again, where I was 6 years ago before the podcast, like, I feel like I am so much more knowledgeable about the game of basketball. And I also feel like I know so much less about it at the same time because of all the smart minds that I talk to. And so I think if you're, again, a player or you're a coach, when you have passion for what you're doing, you're constantly just looking for ways of how can I get closer to what it is that I want to be. And I think that's what we're talking about. So to get back to kind of my original question and summarize that, when we talk about how do you design player development, it basically comes down to, you have to individualize it for each player, what they need, and then be able to give them the tools that allow them to improve and ultimately expand their capabilities so that they're a more versatile player. And again, sometimes that looks different. Sometimes that could be, hey, everybody needs to, work on this because it's part of our offense. Everybody needs to play off 2 feet when we get into the lane. So that's a skill that, like, every player, I don't care what you're doing, every player needs to have that. So that's something that you can work on with everybody. Conversely, you might not need every player on your team to be able to come off a ball screen and make reads and throw a pocket pass. So
no doubt,
it's just, you have to figure out, right, what works within the confines of your team, your offense, and then what each individual player brings to the table. I think that's the best way to kind of summarize sort of that conversation that we just put together.
No doubt. I think you did a great job with that. And that's probably something that I wouldn't be able to do myself. So to your point, this podcast itself has helped me immensely grow as not only as a coach, but as a person, and then as a father and as a husband, and all the things that you want to, be at a high level at being, right? And a lot of those, most of those aren't basketball specific. Most of those are how you treat people and how you, develop relationships and all that. It just happens that basketball is the piece that brings us together, just like
For
our
sure.
kids. Like, we want to help develop them. And it just so happens that I'm the dad of two. And so that brings us together. And so, but you're really trying to do a lot of the similar things with all the people that you come in contact with. And I get it. You're not as close to some, and you're closer to your players than you are most other people. And I get that, but that's all part of it as well. Right. And so, I think it all relates, and it all, like I talk to our guys sometimes, it's the coming together of the system and your ability, and those things meshing together. That's why we're good. It's not just because of the system or just because of what I put in place. And it's not just because our players are good. It's the meshing of all of those things. And so when you can mesh all of those things together and it works, and then you can repeat that over and over with different mesh points, if that makes sense, because you have different people each time. And so that's what makes a really good coach, I think. And that's what makes a really good program, is meshing the two things together and letting your kids have some say in that. And then you have some say in that. It's not one or the other. It's, I see on both ends of the spectrum, right? A lot of teams have a ton of talent. They can't mesh the system together, or they don't go hard or whatever. And then I see some that have great systems, but the skill sets of the players aren't exactly together yet. So you really have to mesh the two together, and that's what really coaching is. And again, now I've gone into the weeds on a philosophical thing right from your question.
No, you haven't. So I'm gonna bring it back. I'm gonna wrap those two things together, from question number 2, or topic number 2, to topic number 3. Right. So in topic number 2, we're talking about the system, right? We're talking about special situations. We're talking about coaching. We're talking about putting players in situations in practice to prepare them for what they're going to see in game. So that's the system. That's the coaching. That's designing your practice, where, again, you're stepping back in those moments and letting your players handle that. But still, you had to take the time to prepare that situation beforehand, to think about, what am I trying to get my players to understand through putting them in this situation. So that's the team side of it. That's the coach side of it, sort of preparing. That's like setting the table, right? And then the player development side of it is, now that's like, you got to take the ingredients and put them into the practice and develop those. And the better ingredients you have, the better that system is going to work. And so I think that's how these two topics, and clearly I didn't go into this conversation thinking that connection, that's how we were going to connect it. But as we're talking, that's what's coming into my head, is you have the system over here, as you said, and then on the other side, you have the players. And when you put those two together and you've maximized both, to quote the Kevin Eastman, the capability gap of, I'm trying to make the most of my system as a coach, and then conversely, I'm trying to get my players as close to that. Now you put those two things together, and that's where the secret sauce is. That's where you can win a lot of games and have a lot of success, both with the scoreboard, but also just with developing people. And to me, I think that makes, again, it's a synergy that fits together perfectly.
Right on. I think you're exactly right, how you brought all those pieces together, and I couldn't have done it better myself. And so this is why you're the host of this podcast, because you can do things like this. And so, just like the synergy of a team and individuals, the synergy of us being together, makes this podcast hopefully unique and worth listening to for people out there. And I appreciate you and how you do your thing, and how it relates to the basketball piece. And you're really great at what you do, and I'm honored to be on here with you every time we do one of these.
Well, the feeling is by far mutual. I look at the success that you've had as a coach, and the things that you do, and the people that you've impacted, both on and off the floor. And again, I'm always honored just to be able to have you as a part of it. And it's just the conversations that we have every time, Rob, even though we trade the topics beforehand, it's always interesting to me that we again end up going off in slightly different directions that, to me, always end up with an interconnection. There's always sort of a rhyme behind the reason of what we're doing. And the conversations always, as I say all the time, I walk away far more enlightened than probably I have any right to to feel after having a conversation with you and on the pod. So the triple double has been a blast. We're, I think, right about at we're close to a year here on the thing. Obviously, number 11 next year will be 12, so that'll be a year's worth of them. I'm so glad that we connected back in Louisville back a year ago and put this thing together. It's been a lot of fun, as you've said multiple times. Hopefully, anybody who's out there listening finds value in it, because I think, if nothing else, Rob, you and I walk away feeling like we got something out of it. So if nothing else, from a selfish standpoint, you and I are having a conversation that's always just a lot of fun. So
that's exactly right. And hopefully we can keep it going for another year or two or three, or however long we can keep it going. So
absolutely.
I love it.
Rob and Trey are head to Italy here in a couple days. So we will be back in the month of July at some point for triple double number 12. So thank you, Rob, for joining us here for triple double number 11. Hopefully we'll get Jason back for number 12. And to all of you out there listening, we really appreciate it. And we will catch you on our next episode. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Hoop Heads podcast, presented by Head Start Basketball.